that was spooky, you know. And I don't know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. According to the Hannahs, after 6 weeks of Jody stabbing herself with forks and knives, cutting herself, and wanting to commit suicide and trying to seduce the husband of the family, they kicked her out. I don't know what's the...
In his second interview with police, Kevin Franke discloses the full extent of Ruby's sick, sad rabbit hole. But what else is Kevin hiding?
Things got really... It got strange around the...
Yeah, things are getting really, quote-unquote, strange, Kevin. They're actually getting horrific when it comes to all of the evidence that's being released about Ruby Franke, her children, and their therapist, Jody Hildebrandt. In a couple of days, I'll be putting out a video in which I use statement analysis to go over the deception and lies by Ruby and Jody Hildebrandt. But I'll also be taking a look at the ways I believe that Ruby Franke is the true definition of a sadist, and the way many of her words and actions can lead us to understanding that she was raising her children in a sadistic type of environment, even before Jody came around. But until then, I need to share this interview audio with you. This is the second interview given to police by Kevin Franke. In the first interview, he was very quick to defend and protect his wife. So who knows exactly what happened between the first and second time he met with police. But in this second interview, Kevin is really opening up about the truth, the disgusting truth of what was going on behind the scenes as Ruby devoted her life to Jody and the Connections group.
The fall of 2020, the Hannahs were trying to convince and bring Ruby into...
The Hannahs.
Okay, so Ruby Franke's Reddit page has been doing some sleuthing about the Hannah family, okay? The Hannahs are a husband and wife couple with around 10 children who seem to be incredibly wealthy and have a real estate company in Utah. They were very close friends of Ruby's. And through this interview, we all come to realize that they were the masterminds behind getting the Frankes into the Connections cult. But the crazy thing is, the Hannahs went on to start a second therapy group. Some are calling it a second cult, and they're questioning what goes on in this quote-unquote therapy. So we're going to be hearing a lot about the mysterious Hannah family in this interview with Kevin, and it brings to light a lot of their involvement in everything that goes down. We do know that Ruby's daughter Sherry, who left the family several years ago and has been in ongoing discord with her mom and dad, is close friends with Paige Hannah, the wife of the couple. And Paige Hannah accompanied Sherry to a recent court hearing, seemingly in an attempt to support her friend. You can find this family on Instagram under Johnny Paige Hannah. Their tagline reads, "I'm Paige, he's Johnny. We beget," and then it lists several children. They say that they are practitioners of the neuro-linguistic programming and timeline therapy, the emotion code, and body code. They are followed by Sherry. But as of right now, this page is private. I wonder why. Could it have to do with the fact that they don't want to be further investigated for their relationship with Ruby Franke? Well, it turns out Paige and Johnny were the first ones to get super involved with Jodi and use her therapy for their own marriage and family. But now we're going to hear an awful lot about what happened with the Hannahs and Jodi Hildebrandt, and it's pretty shocking and scary. Kevin starts to describe how the Hannahs were an integral part of pulling Ruby Franke into the Connections cult.
Into this organization called Connections, and that particularly were focused on things like lust versus love, and healthy marriages, happier marriages, happier relationships. She invited me to go to it was like a conference or something held.
Okay, so here we have Kevin talking about how he knew that Connections was focused on strengthening your marriage and dealing with lust. Why would this apply specifically to Ruby and Kevin Franke? Well, in case you're not aware, early on in the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, Ruby makes it clear that there's something going on with Kevin. She never says flat out exactly what's happening, but we're led to believe that Kevin has an addiction, or she feels he has an addiction to porn, and it's something they have to overcome together as a family. It's something that she doesn't want to be a part of their lives. Now, I have gone on to surmise, based upon just allegations and rumors, as well as listening to the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, going through all the statements, I believe that Jodi and Ruby had a somewhat interesting sex life for a period of time until Ruby decided that she was not interested in continuing forward with whatever kind of shenanigans Kevin was pushing for in the bedroom.
Up in Oregon, and then he'll be home for one day, and then he turns around and he's going down to Mexico to take reconnaissance imaging from the earthquake. So we have one day together, and he's asking if I want to go on a hot date. But now I have to go get cleaned up because apparently I have a sexy date.
And I believe this is a part of what drew Ruby to a program like Connections. She already believed that her husband was interested in the kind of sexual relations that she felt was either inappropriate or potentially sinful in the eyes of God. Now, Ruby is the kind of person who has a lot of psychological issues going on in her own mind. So if you add in her husband's desire for sexual interactions that don't match up with what the church says are appropriate, I think you really get a ticking time bomb for a marriage that is eventually going to implode. And it seems like there are many points along the way in Jodi and Kevin's relationship where they are struggling. And now we listen to Kevin talk about how Ruby and the Hannahs were pushing him to get involved in Connections, this type of therapy that was going to free him from his lustful nature.
At Thanksgiving Point in Lehigh. And there were like 100 people there, and that was in the fall of 2019, maybe late summer of 2019, late summer 2019. And my impression at that time was this is absolute craziness. This is a bunch of man-hating women that are just looking for excuses to tear down their husbands. And I mean, that's what it felt like to me when I was in there.
So right away from the beginning, Kevin, he recognizes what is going on here and he's pretty defensive about it. He's not interested until the Hannah family steps in, starts pushing it, tells them what a wonderful program it is and how much it can help them in the future with their marriage.
But it was confusing because there were people that I respected a lot that were up on the stage with microphones in hand, giving testimonials of how great this was and how it changed their lives and their marriage, and like the Hannahs were among them, and so yeah, it was confusing.
So fast forward things a little bit, Kevin basically describes getting roped into this group and eventually becoming a kind of active member, even appearing on stage and espousing the wonderful ways in which Jody has helped him.
Ruby, then we went on a trip with the Hannahs to the UK in October of 2019, and I swear the whole objective of the trip was to like convince me to get into Connections, because all of them were in it except me, but they made some really eloquent arguments, and I agreed to join a men's group with Jody in January of 2020, and I would do it for 3 months. So I started that men's group in 2020. I don't know if you've ever been to like an addiction recovery group, but that's what it.
So here's when we kind of find out that the men's group for Connections is kind of presented as an addiction recovery group. And what would Kevin need to recover from? Well, most likely, and this is just based upon the little bit of information I've gathered, I still think that it has to do with Ruby poking and prodding him about potentially having a sex or porn addiction. In Ruby's eyes, we don't know for sure exactly what was going on and how normal or abnormal it may have been. We just know that for Ruby, it was sinful, and she was pushing him to get some help, and that's exactly what Connections was offering.
All of them were like working through various stages of like sex addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, and it was just it was like a 12-step group, but intended just for general like addiction recovery, and I really was like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I don't belong here. But everyone's like, no, come here, like you can learn to have.
I can just imagine that even though Kevin didn't get it, according to Ruby, he did belong there. And we're going to hear more about what Ruby's accusations are towards him a little bit further into the interview.
A better like life and a better marriage, and so I thought, okay, whatever. I went through my obligatory 3 months, and I was ready to leave. And then I got challenged to sit down and have a vulnerable conversation with my wife and ask her how my lustful choices have affected her.
Okay, this is where we get into Ruby voicing that she's been uncomfortable. She has not felt good about their sexual interactions with one another. And I believe, based upon like some statement analysis stuff we can look into, I believe that Kevin is only sharing with us what he wants us to know. He's being very vague. He says that Ruby says a couple of things and it really hits him and affects him. It goes straight to his heart, and he decides he wants to change his behaviors. But he is very vague about what he did that Ruby actually has such a big problem with. And I'm really curious about how far it goes.
And, to me, that was like a loaded question. I thought, I still didn't see what I had done or anything that would constitute any form of like, abuse or anything like that. And, but I did. I took the challenge and I sat down, and for 2 hours, Ruby very emotionally just shared how she felt in our marriage and how the things that I, over 20 years of marriage, asking for sex as a husband frequently, or asking her to wear lingerie or things like that, how that made her feel.
Quote unquote, things like that. What are the things like that, Kevin? Now, It's totally possible that what Ruby, in her mental state, with her mental issues, what Ruby feels is inappropriate may be very normal to the majority of us. Or it may not be. Like, how did Ruby get to this point where she's having so much anxiety about sex to the point that she even goes on to eventually accuse her own children of being sexually inappropriate with other children? There's something going on in Ruby's background, in her way of thinking, that has really become very distorted, and we don't know for sure why or how. I do know for sure, using statement analysis, that Kevin is being extremely vague about the specific situations that Ruby felt uncomfortable with. And I really do have to question, like, what was his role in it? What was happening in the marriage between Ruby and Kevin that led down this road to where we are right now? As we go on in this interview, you will be completely floored by what Kevin shares is going on with both Ruby and Jody, and the fact that everyone seems to think it's okay. You know, no one really steps up and says, this is insane. It takes Kevin quite a long time to start saying no, to start distancing himself from Jody and Ruby. So there's something going on with all of the adults in this situation that is inappropriate. And I invite you to join me tomorrow on the YouTube channel Mothership Explores to ask the question, what is going on with Kevin Franke? And does he seem like the kind of person who should be able to take custody of the children now that Ruby is serving her time in prison? We have a lot to discuss in regards to this interview, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow so we can head down yet another rabbit hole.